So hello everyone and welcome to the Toronto Area Region Virtual Speaker Series. Our virtual speaker series occurs bi-weekly on Tuesday evenings from 7 to 8 p.m. and will be running until June 2nd. Tonight we are very pleased to have Alec Couros presenting on new formats for learning. Specifically, he's going to be discussing building online and blended environments, and we like to think that our virtual speaker series is actually one of those new formats for learning, and we hope that you enjoy tonight's presentation. For informational purposes, Alec Couros is the brother of George Couros, who presented earlier. Alec is a professor of educational technology and media at the University of Regina. He is an expert on openness in education, social media in education, and critical media literacy. And he is a strong supporter of having educators and others take advantage of the educational potential offered through tools. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alec, and we look forward to listening to you tonight.
Great, thanks, Patrick. Hi, everyone. I'm going to just share my screen here, and thanks for the nice introduction. I've got a few slides, but if you are, I'll actually send up the hashtag in a bit. So if you found us on Twitter, make sure you use the hashtag eLearnONT for Ontario, and thanks for the kind sponsors for running this event, and thanks for having me here today. So I'm going to see if I can do a screen share and share my slides. And the series was called Game Changers, so I wanted to make sure that I have a Ontario versus Saskatchewan type image that might apply to some there as you watch the rider run away from the competition in a sense. So Game Changers, when we're thinking about game changers, and can you, I think you can see the screen okay, right? Looks okay? Yeah, perfect. So Game Changers, in this particular environment, what I want to talk about, as Patrick mentioned, is the idea of building online and blended course environments. And so what I'm going to try to do here in this presentation is go through some of the more traditional forms as well as the emerging forms. And if you want to join us today, I'm just going to click on the right button here. I'm at Courosa on Twitter. Feel free to engage me there. As well, if you want to follow the hashtag, and we'll be hopefully taking some questions later on, and you can certainly ask them through eLearnONT, and one of these fine people will interrupt me, and I can try to take a question if you like. So first a little while, I'll try to present as well as I can, and then beyond that, we'll certainly have some time for questions. All right, so a little bit about me. As Patrick mentioned, oops, I'm hitting the wrong buttons, so I'm not used to this environment. I'm a professor of educational technology at the Faculty of Education, University of Regina. I'm also kind of all over the web in terms of using a number of these tools. I try to model these particular tools and model a particular online identity, which I think has been a great part of, I think, being an educator in the digital world is being able to have a lot of access to a lot of tools and connections and so on. So I'm going to move into this concept of little boxes to networks, and I'm going to honor one of your own U of T professors in a second here, but I want to kind of end off where George talked about. He brought up the connected teacher diagram, and this is from my 2001 work when I was looking at sort of the idea of 21st century learning networks and personal learning networks. And back then, I was thinking, you know, all of these new tools that were coming out, they were really transforming what we thought about education. Before that, we really didn't have, I mean, if I'm thinking 2001, there was something called WebCT, which was, this is what Blackboard bought later on. And so in terms of a lot of learning innovation, we were really new at that time. But what I really didn't get at that time, and I think it took a long time to really fully understand the implications of this, is what the tools did. We were focused a lot as educators on the idea of really, I guess, the tool-oriented aspects of, you know, all these new tools that we were able to get, and how we could actually, whether it's connecting or whether it's sharing content or whether it's kind of creating new videos, that was really the focus. But later on, it became rather apparent to many of us that those people that we connected to, the connections that you gain through all of these different tools, were the most important piece. And this is kind of where Barry Wellman's work comes in. And he actually talked about this in a 2002 paper where he actually says that there's a paradigm shift, and basically there's this world of little boxes, which I'll explain in a second, to surfing life through diffuse variegated social networks. So there's a shift from being in these little boxes as educators, and you might want to think classrooms, to this idea that we can actually connect in some really interesting ways. So for instance, just to start off with, as a kind of an understanding of how we can actually view education. So if you look at the idea with little boxes, you've got these classrooms that are typically self-governing. They don't share a whole lot. This would be more of a traditional classroom, very much like a one-room school, I guess, in some ways. And some of these new tools have allowed us to move towards globalization, which is a hybrid between global and local, where we are able to connect via Skype and Google Hangout and start to actually share some of our student work. And I think this is pretty much the common model for many classrooms, at least many modern classrooms today. But Wellman talks about this idea that we're moving towards this idea of networked individualism, where ultimately where students need to be when they're done, they need to be sort of connected and self-governing and self-directed in a number of different ways and fully prepared to take on the advantages of the digital age. So in that same paper, he actually talks about this idea that the person has become the portal. We used to kind of be identified the sort of learning innovation as, the course was the center of everything. Where obviously, when we start to think about student-centered learning, this actually really makes much more sense. And I want to also, before I get into some of the details and some of the tools and some models, I guess, for types of online and blended courses, I think it's important to, to ground this in some sense of literacy. And one of my favorite lists, I guess, of what of 21st century literacies is from the NCTE. And ultimately, when I think of developing an online or blended course or doing any type of education with young people, is to think about these points. And I think, for instance, this idea of developing proficiency with the tools of technology, this is something that's going to come up, to ensure that students have the ability to use new tools, emerging tools, and so on. The idea of building relationships, but not necessarily just ones that are in the classroom, but also to think cross-culturally and globally, of course, in some ways, which kind of takes us to the third one, design and share information for global communities. There was a speaker, Simon Breakspear, not too long ago, where he talks about the idea that students no longer have to be locally good. They have to be now globally good. And I think that really is a consideration when you start to think about designing an online or blended classroom. The idea of managing and analyzing and synthesizing multiple streams of simultaneous information, I often think of like a Hootsuite or TweetDeck or some sort of, even something like Storify, for instance, or tools like that, which allow us to sort of make sense and do some sense-making, I guess, of the world. Critique and analyze multimedia text. The ability to create video and audio and other forms of media are becoming as important, if not more important, than writing essays, for instance. And of course, with all of this idea of ethical responsibility. So if you kind of keep these in mind as we kind of move on, this is really central to a lot of what I talk about. And when I look at my own work some years back, a big part of, I think, the educational journey for our students should be this idea of thinning the walls. So if you look at this particular diagram that I created some years back, it's this idea that our classrooms, sometimes we need to be private and closed, kind of on the left there. But as we go through the educational enterprise, we should be thinking about how do we actually make those opportunities public and open? How do we eventually allow our students to understand what is appropriate to post in particular spaces? What are appropriate interactions? How do we create a public self? How do we keep, and maintain a private self? When is it appropriate to be closed in our learning and thinking, and when is it appropriate to be open? And what are the possibilities and dangers of all of, the entire spectrum, and thinking about lost opportunities and, of course, all sorts of other dangers that may present themselves in this sort of thinking. But ultimately, our lives are going to be much more combined with both online and offline possibilities. So we have to really prepare students to kind of live on this entire continuum. And if I were to do this diagram again, I probably wouldn't have an arrow that just kind of goes off to the right. I'd think of it more of a kind of a coming back and forth and making the right choices along the way, because I think sometimes we want to go back to private and back to closed, and that, of course, is going to be really an important consideration with all this. All right. So to kind of move on to course design types, I've actually presented, and if you follow Patrick McQuaid here, or the hashtag, I've got a Google Doc that I have a list of different things, and I'll just make sure that someone posts it to the eLearn Ontario hashtag. And the Google Doc will have some examples of these course design types, plus a lot of the different tools. And of course, it'll have contact information if you want to get a hold of me in any way. So if you want to think about, I guess, the three main types of course environments, probably the first and most traditional is this institutionally controlled LMS. And in institution, this often looks like Moodle, Blackboard, Canvas, Brightspace. I'm not sure what others are using. But these are typically institutionally managed and controlled learning spaces. And they play a role. I'm not saying that these are worse than what I'm going to talk about eventually. They play a role, and they make sense for a lot of people. So people who are looking at the use of them, for instance, some of the advantages of a learning management system, and sometimes it's also called a course management system. The term kind of changed over the years. There's, student management is integrated and centralized. So, for instance, it's really nice that all my students are populated. We use this at the U Regina. We use something called Moodle here. And, I know my students, once they're registered for classes, they show up in my class, and that's really convenient. It's hosted by a district and or vendor, and often there's control of data. So, for instance, if it's hosted locally, you know that the student data is protected and backed up and maintained. Typically more private and compliant with policy and legislation. Jurisdictions in Canada, for instance, British Columbia in particular, there's a really tight restriction in terms of hosting data outside of the outside of the country. So things like the Patriot Act are much more compliant with things like learning management systems. And certainly, in most cases, there's less technical knowledge needed by the users in comparison to some of the other models that I'll show you as well. Although there's still a learning curve in using these tools, sometimes it can be certainly a lot less than what I'm going to show you as well. Beyond that, some of the disadvantages. There's often few options for making students' work open. There's also some pedagogical limitations, especially related to the sort of the globality, serendipity, and the authentic feedback, or you might even want to think of the idea of real-world feedback. Web 2.0 tools are typically more powerful and advanced. There's things that you can't often do in an LMS. LMSs are really good for managing learners. I mean, the idea of learning management system or even a learner management system, really a lot of that's happening. And I guess one of the things I often hear in school is this idea it's not what the kids use. The kids are, no one says I'm going to go home and Moodle something after school or Blackboard something, and that's really an important consideration. It's a disconnect. It's something else you log into. That's why sometimes people will use things like FaceTime and be very successful with that, or not FaceTime, Facebook, for instance. I know there's a number of local examples of Regina teachers who are using FaceTime to connect with parents, and parents comment that this is really a great tool because I don't have to log out of that and into something else. It's just part of my everyday. Now, of course, there's also, using something like Facebook also carries with it a lot of weight of other issues, especially around privacy and protocols and etiquette and all sorts of things as well. Now, one of the things that I think is also important about this model is, and this is coming from John Mott and David Wiley, this is kind of an important consideration here. So the CMS or LMS, often what we do, and I think this is kind of an unfortunate thing sometimes, we spend like a semester trying to build up a community of some sort, and then we basically delete all the student data and we archive the course and we get them to make friends after that again, versus a personal learning network or a PLN. And this is something that you can garner and maintain and create connections over a long time. So that's kind of a glaring contradiction or a comparison that we have to really think about in terms of actually creating communities. CMSs or LMSs are really good for creating courses, but they're not always very good at creating communities. And sometimes we want to do that when we're thinking about it. So I think it's an important consideration. Now, on to the next version, and this is something a lot of teachers in the past few years that I've visited have really got into. So there's these teacher-controlled LMSs. These are typically, you can sign up for them, you create an instant sort of course mode, and you probably have heard of things like Schoology, Edmodo, or in Google application supported or Google Apps supported districts, you might use something like Google Classroom. But Schoology and Edmodo are ones that anyone can have access to. For Google Classroom, you'd need to have a Google Apps supporting district. Typically, there's some advantages and disadvantages of this, and this kind of fits in the middle somewhere of the final one I'll show you. So some of the advantages, they're designed for hosting and supporting courses or communities. They're often a centralized hub of activity and communication. So for instance, something like Edmodo allows kind of primary communication for the entire course. There's easy sign up and access for students, teachers, and parents. One of the nice features I find in the parent version of Edmodo, for instance, and I think Schoology has the same thing, is that there's a special code for being able to access student data, just their students, their kids' data. The user interface usually feels familiar and user-friendly, and often there's usually good and responsive support from vendors. I've seen a lot of people just simply tweet the Edmodo or Schoology and get very instant support, and that certainly that can happen in a district, but it not necessarily happens in a district from an LMS. Sometimes you have to pull a ticket and other things like that as well. Of course, depending on the demand and so on. I'm not saying anything about district support. It's just a bit different when you have millions of dollars behind a particular product in venture capital. Some of the other disadvantages, I guess, there are certainly still issues of student privacy. Anything that you are using for free isn't really free. What are they doing with student data? It's outside institutional control for support and/or incidents that may come across. It's still lacking some of the open pedagogical possibilities because it's still kind of a walled garden, depending on how you set it up, but mostly it's a walled garden of some sort. And it's not overly configurable, lacking some features. It doesn't do everything the Web 2.0 tools by themselves do. Certainly you can bring those tools into this teacher-controlled learning management system, or you could bring that to some extent into some of the newer LMSs, but it's not quite the same. Now, the things that I've been designing, and I'm not saying, again, that this is better, this is just the way that I view the world and the way that I think is appropriate for the types of courses I'm teaching and so on, is this idea of like small tools loosely joined. It's like taking a lot of different tools and kind of creating your own ad hoc LMS in some ways. So it reduces some of the constraints, and it takes away the control pieces, and it gives you a lot of different possibilities, but then some of those really nice comforting things that you have in the LMS are removed as well. So there's still, again, some negatives and positives. And in terms of doing this, I've seen a lot of teachers start with a bit of a hub, something like Google Sites or anything that's WordPress-based, like EduBlogs or WordPress.com or WordPress.org if you want to host it yourself, or KidBlog.org. There's that kind of hub where the central communication might happen, or Weebly in some cases. And then there's pretty much everything else. I mean, there's all these other tools, and again, you can certainly use these in the two previous models I talked about. But things like TouchCast or Explain Everything for creating flipped classroom type videos and so on, FreshGrade for assessment, Google Drive for documents, Evernote for student note-taking, Voxer for communication, also Remind would be very similar, or Hangout would be good for that, or Dropbox for file storage management. So there's a lot of tools that you're kind of putting together, and you have to make the case either as an instructor who puts these together and tell your students this is how we're going to share things, or students might find their own way of sharing things individually. So it does become quite a bit more complex. So some advantages of this, I think there's a great pedagogy and openness. There's serendipitous possibilities when you start putting things in the open, and I'll explain some of those in a bit. There's an abundance of tools. You never have to. You'll never run out of tools. There's always something that'll do something that you need to do. In fact, you might even run into more of a paradox of choice where you have so many tools you don't know what to pick from. And this is probably one of the biggest important things around this particular model, is that you have rich possibilities for teaching and modeling digital citizenship. And with that, I think is the next point, that you also allow students to develop positive digital footprints. You can't really do this in an LMS, or even to some extent something like Edmodo or Schoology, where most of the student artifacts are in sort of in closed doors or in silos or behind walls. And certainly you're starting to think outside the box, literally, with something like this. And there's a lot of possibilities for real-world feedback, where, for instance, if student blogs are in the open, they can have, I guess, people who are interested in those particular posts actually commenting. So there is something to be said about this. Disadvantages, of course, there's also disadvantages as well. Issues of student privacy is much more problematic in cases like this. We have to recognize this. And I don't think, even if I'm an advocate of this, I think that we have to be very respectful and caring about student privacy. It's more difficult to set up, manage, or administer, because you're using a lot of different tools, a lot of different logins, and they don't quite fit together very properly. It can be more difficult to follow for students. Sometimes students have remarked to me that they just want something that's less chaotic. They just want to be able to log into a learning management system and get their stuff, and that's it. And that works for some courses, certainly, but not all. And there's also this safety of the LMS, whether it's stranger danger or whether it's copyright infringement or something. I've heard some while back that a lot of colleagues and other professors, for instance, prefer things like LMSs because they can basically do rampant copyright infringement that is kind of behind closed doors. And that's, to me, is not a very good example of why we'd want to use an LMS, but it's certainly a consideration that there is this safety behind an LMS, whether it's your own teaching or pedagogy, whether it's the content you use, or whether it's your student privacy. There's all sorts of issues around that as well. Anyway, so that's just kind of an example of that. Does anyone here on the panel have any questions at this point, or before I kind of get on to some more? I could just go ramble on all day.
Alec, I have a question. Andy
Sure.
Kuchin here. The question I have is, so and I hear what you're saying, and the balance between the pros and cons from both a management system of some type versus a collaboration or a group of apps and tools to kind of best meet the needs to differentiate for the learners. For larger boards, do you see this as right down maybe at the school level, right down granular to the classroom level? And what I say by that is, so you have a teacher who has 10 favorite tools and apps that they use. Now, I'll take a blogging site, for example.
Okay.
One uses blogging site A, and the kid is students putting all their work on there. They move to classroom B if they're on Rotary or in a different classroom, and now the teacher says, we're going to use blogging site B. So now the differentiation happens at the classroom level. But now the student is now having 3 or 4 different sites to kind of manage their blogging sites.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important concern. So, for instance, if students are doing blogging, I would give it. There's a good examples. I was mentioning to Patrick earlier that even in Peel District there are people that use things like Campus Press, which actually allow right across the entire school. For instance, they're using the same platform, and it's a WordPress. Like, I really like, for student blogging, WordPress-based platforms. And there's a number of them, EduBlogs, WordPress.com, or even sort of ones that you can apply right across the entire school. WordPress provides, so it's still that a bit of that small worlds loosely joined aspect. I think WordPress makes a fantastic product. It's strongly supported. It's open source, so it's free. Just the hosting would cost money if you didn't want to host it yourself. And the data is migratable, so you can take it out and put it into another WordPress. So, for instance, if you create something in kindergarten that accumulates throughout the entire through to your K-12 experience, like some districts have done that as well, you could take it out when you're done and put it into another WordPress of your own that you would host your own, or you could delete it. I mean, that's the student choice as well. So There's a lot to be said about using the same tools beyond. I guess they don't have to always be an LMS, but I totally get what you're saying there. So, for instance, Kathy Cassidy, who I'm going to mention later on, has a great grade 1 classroom in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and they do some great blogs. I think they use EduBlogs, for instance. But when they go to grade 2, a lot of that stuff gets lost. Maybe it's okay for it to get lost. I mean, that's part of the process, and there is something to be said about trying different tools, going to Weebly or going to the LMS. But I think there needs to be a balance, and so I think there needs to be a stronger conversation across schools, like what is the trajectory of the students' learning and how will we keep that open? What is the advantages of like looking at some sort of standard tool? But I think, I think for the most part, I would advocate that we do need some private spaces. So I don't always think that an LMS is bad, and I've flip-flopped on it a little bit. Like for the most part, I'm not a big fan of sort of controlled side of learning, but I recognize that students sometimes need more private spaces to make mistakes than we often give them credit for. And I do like that the ability that we can also give them open spaces to connect and so on. So being able to say, for a student, say, you know what, this is something I would need to post in my private space, and this is something I want to blog. I think we need to be able to model that particular piece as well. And I think also that nature of being able to archive these things in a consistent space is always an important thing. That's why I'm a big WordPress fan. But that's a really good point. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Alec, it's Joe here. We've got a question in from Twitter.
Sure, let's put it up there. Let's see. Are some of the LMS's examples, stages we go through as teachers and students, from less to more open, from more to less structured? Are some of these LMS's examples, stages? Well, I think yes and no. I think that's a really good point. So thanks for that question. And I think part of it, I think I was a big LMS fan, and sometimes I go through there, like from a teacher workload perspective. LMSs can be really kind of a nice thing. Like you design a course once, you've got all your links and everything up, and then once you've archived it, you move it over, and you don't have to worry about that complexity of creating a whole different environment the next time. So certainly there's that stage aspect to it. And I think also other people are at different career stages, and I think that's the other sort of overlap here. So sometimes someone who's brand new in the classroom may want to just get behind an LMS, but once you start to get more comfortable with the web as your literacy grows, you might actually see something a bit more progressive, I guess, in some ways. And also, I think there's that just ability or wanting to share. So yeah, I think there's a bit of a stage piece, whether that's teacher directed or student directed. But rather than grow out of an LMS, I would rather see that LMSs and more, more complex and chaotic versions of learning happen simultaneously, that students can fall back into other spaces. So I think that there's more a case to support more than one than the other. And in terms of school districts, the more I see is that there's this Wild West. There's this growing Wild West of teachers that are going to continue to use these particular tools, that want to use these tools, and then there's the other teachers that really are comfortable with LMSs. And I think we can have both. I think we just need to have a better conversation of what each one does and how we can bring at least some consistency to our students, because ultimately those decisions around what we choose as a learning environment affect our students in their own data, for one, also their comfort with a particular learning environment for another, and I think so there's lots to be said there. And I don't know if you have any other questions, Joe, or from Twitter. Is that it for now?
That's all for now.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to switch over here. I'm going to try to go screen sharing. I'm pretty new at this Google Hangout stuff, but it seems to be good so far. Hope people are following along. All right. Designing for openness, and I think this is, thinking about my own work, I guess, and how I've done some course design. And I've done, when I started back in 2007, when I taught one of my first grad courses, I did something called an open boundary course. And an open boundary course was kind of the pre-MOOC thing before they actually kind of invented MOOCs in 2008. And it was this idea that I had a grad course, and I thought, I wonder if I just invite the entire world and see what happens, if we brought people in. And it was kind of amazing, and kind of these same principles that I'll show you here is sort of how I kind of brought this together. So as I mentioned before, WordPress, Weebly, Google Sites, and those types of sites are quite appropriate for sort of a central hub. So if you're in a world without the LMS, having a hub is worthwhile. And so, for instance, and I'm going to just post these, and feel free to tweet them out. This was a MOOC that I ran not too long ago. It was called etmooc.org, And if you're looking for, say, a hub or taking a look at a site that actually has a hub, this is a totally a WordPress site. Basically, you can find everything you want about the course there. You can see it basically brings everything together, whether it's Twitter, whether it's we use Blackboard Collaborate, for instance, for the live webinar sessions. There's archives and so on. So this kind of just gives you, the whole point of showing you this is it gives you a bit of an idea of what one of these things looks like. Now, another great example is Kathy Cassidy's blog. It's a different type of hub. Let's see if I can find this, and I'm just going to post it to the chat so someone can tweet it out to the LearnOnt hashtag. And so, or you could just Google Miss Cassidy's Classroom blog. This is a great example of an EduBlog site where you actually have one central teacher, perfect for elementary. This is a grade 1 classroom where you actually have the teacher kind of talking or demonstrating what learning is happening in the class, along with, if you look at the sidebar, there's actually a blog link for every student in the class. This is a really great example of learning in the open, and this being sort of the hub for learning, at least the hub when you start to think about what's actually shared online. Certainly in a grade 1 classroom, it's not going to especially be all online, but this is, I guess, a glimpse into what is actually happening in that classroom and a great way of communicating with the classroom. Now, I asked on Twitter today some other examples of other tools being used to create course sites, and this was one I got from Jen Danberg, and you can see her Twitter handle on the side here. Jen's in Alberta, and this is an example of a course site created in Weebly for the Wild Rose School Division, and you can get a good sense of how this is set up. Again, this is not an LMS. This is just a Weebly site, which I was actually kind of impressed because I haven't been a big fan of Weebly in the past, but it looked pretty decent in terms of how it was set up. And I know there's a lot of teachers that really like Weebly because there is, versus WordPress. WordPress, a lot of people complain that it's more difficult. I think the customizability is a lot better in WordPress. Weebly is more drag and drop, I guess, in that sense. So it sometimes makes it fairly easy to create something. That's just another example for you to take a look at. And here's one other example. And the reason I'm giving you this is another one that I've done. This is ecomp355.ca, and this is what I do with my undergraduate students. So in my class, every one of my students has their own blog, and I think it's really important that students control their own learning spaces. So in that case, they all go to wordpress.com or blogger.com or whatever else. And this blog, simply, all it does is it acts as an aggregator. So every time one of my students posts, it goes to ecomp355.ca. So there's a couple of things here. First of all, this is basically the hub in itself is all my students. It's not a central place where you get information. It's basically the voices of my students. And also, I bought the domain name. And I think that's kind of a cool thing these days. It may be an important thing that you're actually, rather than renting someone else's domain, you're actually purchasing a place. So this is the hub for all the times I teach this class in the future as well. So all the students will be added to this, and they'll have a collective voices as well. So just another example of how you might do a hub. Now, beyond that, there must be some tweets because my phone's ringing off the hook here, but anyway, I'll turn my phone off for a little bit because it's kind of getting there. There's also a lot of things for communication and connection. Now, I don't know what watching a video is like in this tool, but what I'm going to do is stop it for a second, and I'm going to see if I can run a YouTube video. Now, how do I do that? Any thoughts on that? Oh, wait, I see YouTube. So what I'm going to run here, this is actually a trailer. So when I ran one of my first courses, I ran a trailer for the course. So there's something to be said about communicating that you want people to join a course. So if you're creating a course that's outside, that's available to others, or if you're looking at, for instance, creating artifacts that you want to be shared, there might be something said to be able to, create something that allows other people to see. Now, how do I add the video to this? First time doing this. Oh wait, add video to playlist. All right, let's see if this
Hello.
So Alec, it seems as if you sent the link, but there's no sound or video showing, and you've gone mute.
All right, so that didn't work, I guess. Okay, so I won't bother with that. Can you hear me now, Patrick?
Yep.
And here I thought it was working, but I guess not. Okay, so
And if you provide us the link, we can certainly upload that to the online forum later.
I'll bring it back to the. Can you see my screen again? No, I guess not.
Yes.
You can? Okay. So what you should be able to see here. So this was a course trailer, and the link would be sent out there. So it's about a minute long if you ever get a chance to take a look at it. What was nice about this is when I put this out, a bunch of other people started creating course trailers as well, and it was kind of a neat thing to invite people, whether it's to their classrooms or the classroom blogs or to an open course of some sort. Twitter is becoming more and more popular in the classroom as well. So here's an example of it's not working there. I'm going to bring in my screen share again. Let me try stopping this. Okay, I've got to turn off the YouTube thing now. That changed everything. Okay, so if I turn off the YouTube, close it, there we go. There we go. Can we see the Twitter thing now? Okay.
I can see the screen again, yes.
Perfect, okay. So I'm not sure what happened there. For instance, Twitter is becoming more and more as an important thing. Now, I'm not saying that everyone should use Twitter in the classroom, but where you do, often you're seeing, certainly in advanced, like high school classrooms or certainly college classrooms, you're seeing people partake in a hashtag. That's one example. Another example of, this is from Brian Jackson from British Columbia. For instance, and what I'll do is see if I can bring this in. Now, does this link work? For some reason, it has a www on the end, so you might have to get rid of the bottom part. That might work, the second one. So what you're seeing here is Brian Jackson from BC using Storify to kind of collect. He's actually got his students on Twitter, and they're basically creating historical roles, which I think was a really fantastic way of looking at the use of Twitter. You know, what would people be tweeting about today had they had Twitter back then? Another thing that I think is useful as well, especially if you're looking for audience, there's a hashtag called Comments for Kids by William Chamberlain, who kind of supports that one. And he basically, if you're looking to get some audience for student blogs, if you have blog posts that are particularly of interest or would need some encouragement, tweeting something out to Comments for Kids is actually quite useful. Now, other tools that I know other classroom teachers have used to create some communication in their classroom, remind.com is a favorite that continues to be used quite often. And basically, it started out as an SMS tool to allow one-to-many SMS, and I know that there are particular restrictions in boards and in provinces even around private messaging with students, but this is nice that it allows you to actually do one-to-many and then there's no return. Also, there's an app with this as well, so if students don't have texting plans, this is really quite useful in that case. This one's called Present Me, which is a really easy way to create like a lecture with presentation notes, and it's also free along with these other ones. I'll give you a quick example of something called Flipgrid, which I'm using more and more in my classrooms. And this is a lesser-known tool, but it's something that has come out pretty quickly and coming on quite strong. So I'll give you an example. If the Flipgrid link is tweeted out there with the hashtag, what you'll be able to see is me asking my University of Victoria students a question, and then when you click on that question, first of all, you're able to respond if you wanted to add video, but you'll be able to see all of my students who did a video response to that particular question. So you can put a number of different questions. That creates a panel. so you can have as many questions as you want, and you actually get to see the students. So if you're trying to develop presence and community in your classrooms, especially at a distance classroom, or certainly in a face-to-face or blended classroom, you can see how this would actually add to the community, and you can actually see particular voice. And I really like this this particular tool, and it should be around for a while. It came out from the University of Minnesota, but now it's got some good venture cap, I believe, behind it, and it looks like it's going to be further developed and turn into something really, really great. Another example is one of my favorite sort of flipped classroom type tools. It's an iPad app, and it's actually called TouchCast. And TouchCast is a really great tool for making, and I will see, if you'll have to Google TouchCast for that. That's the wrong link I have below. TouchCast is a really fantastic app that allows you to create high-end videos that look very much like you would in a news broadcast room, where you would have tickers, you'd have videos that you can point to that would appear, so video in video, and lots of really nice features, and it's free, and it's really quite advanced and amazingly easy to use. So if you're looking for flipped content, that's a really great one to use. Then, of course, there's portfolios and assessment. And while a lot of like LMSs will have built-in portfolio or assessment tools, for instance,
Alec,
yep.
Alex, sorry, if I can interrupt and pull
Sure.
a question here from Twitter. It's Joe.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Okay. I'll put it on you. I'll have to turn off my screen share for a second. Hold on a second. Or do I see you? There we go. Are we responsible to help create digital footprints, positive digital footprints for students, or are we more guardians of privacy? I would say that certainly, Dan, that's a great question. I'm certainly pushed on the idea that we need to be responsible to help and create students, digital footprints for students. There's lots of opportunities to do for. Certainly, people would argue against that point. I don't think that we can adequately prepare students for a digital world if we are just simply preserving their digital identity. We really need to think much more proactively about how we actually engage with students and help them develop good things. If we ignore it, I think we're negligent for the types of environments that they create. So if we basically just say, let's stand back and not even bother about digital identity, I think that becomes a real big issue for us, and I do think we're negligent in our responsibilities. Now, others might say, well, that's outside of our jurisdiction, but I think ultimately our jurisdiction is to create learned, employable, and certainly positive digital citizens. I mean, it's part of citizenship, I would say. We have to get back past the idea of digital citizenship and really just focus on the idea of citizenship. And this is what we do, I think, in many cases, if we are really going to. So I think, again, thanks for the question, Dan. I think it's certainly the prior, but of course, it's always debatable.
If I can just add to that is,
Yeah.
how about the notion of the awareness of these tools, the digital citizenship piece, but what about the whole notion of a system-wide support for PD? What do you think of that in terms of these tools and PD?
Well, I don't think we can do it. That's the thing. If we don't have a system-wide support for PD, I think the best way of actually allowing students to create positive digital identity is for teachers and admins to do it first, to model this. It's not simply and we model it not just by creating good things online, but we model it by opening up the decision making of when I put something online or I choose to create a Twitter account in my class, the types of things I share online. Every time you do that, that decision implicates the decision-making ability of a student. So whether it's modeling or whether it's using, for instance, if you're using something like Kahoot or Socrative in the classroom, and you're actually showing students that these tools are not just selfie machines, they're basically they have educational value and so on. I think that's important. And so we're not going to get there unless teachers are systematically educated in the use of digital tools within pedagogy. And I think that's really where we're certainly struggling with all school districts. There's just certainly insufficient funds, or at least a perception of insufficient funds, and certainly not enough vision around what the core responsibilities of teachers are in terms of developing young citizens. And I think that's ultimately where we end on that. So thanks for the question, Joe. All right, I'll move on, keep on going here a little bit. Try to finish this off so we can have some more time for questions. Then portfolios and assessment, I think, are really important. You can see my screen, I'm assuming? Yeah. So there's a lot of different tools that do portfolios quite well. For instance, in BC, because this is a Kelowna-based company, there's something called FreshGrade, which is a really nice tool if you've got an iPad and you want to basically build in student portfolios right from the iPad and share them very easily with the students. So this almost, in some ways, acts as a bit of a hub, I guess, in some ways, but also a really rich way to create portfolios. Something similar to this is called 3Ring, but that's an American-hosted one. I know there are students, certainly in my city, that are using 3Ring as opposed to this one, and I think perhaps because they didn't know about this particular one, but it's a really strong tool that I see a lot of teachers take up as well. So try it out. Other examples, and this is just an example of one of my students. You can find her Paige L. Mitchell on Twitter, and if you follow her Twitter address, you'll actually see that she's done a good job of putting herself out on Twitter as well as having a link to her portfolio. All of my students have the obligation, I guess, to create some sort of digital portfolio. Certainly, they have the option of creating avatars or something else, but more and more understanding how to use a portfolio or create a portfolio is important. Now, there's lots of examples also of creating learning or doing learning in the open. Now, my students will have the ability to actually create learning reflections. Here's one example of that. I'll give you another one. So that's Mitch and Ben singing a song about their learning. This one over here is a kid by the name of, he's actually a teacher now, Matt Bresciani, who actually expressed his learning in using Mario and Photoshop. It's really quite an amazing tool, or amazing reflection. And if you want to see sort of an epic sort of recent reflection from my current students, this one, I don't know, they go to a Grease tribute. It's like basically a musical for about, I'm not sure how many minutes it is. It's like 15 minutes long. But they do all sorts of songs, and they integrate Flipgrid and some student reflection within that whole thing. But the whole point is, these may not be perfect reflections, but they show and express multiple ways for students to express learning. And I think the more that we can do that and help students express learning using advanced tools, and also thinking about what the audience is out there, I think that really pushes our thinking on learning, is that idea that we are creating students that really need to express themselves in open spaces in sometimes. Now, from a connecting standpoint, this is just another example that I thought I'd share, is when I taught that MOOC at MOOC, I had about 2,000 students from around the world who were looking to connect, and there wasn't a whole lot of knowledge of one another in that group before that. People from all over the world, were connecting, and to really help people learn, you want to make sure that they know each other a bit. So I actually created a lip dub. I didn't really create it. All students sent me like individual videos of themselves, and if you want to know how that was done and watch the lip dub itself, I'll just send out another link here to the chat so it can be tweeted out. And what's amazing about this is it basically shows you the process, and that students came together to create this lip dub. They say it was one of the highlights of the class when I talked to students here, and it was really quite amazing that you don't have to do this all together in a place. If you want to bring some sort of sense of community, doing something like a lip dub takes you a long way to actually helping you connect online. There can be community online, and that's important. Now I'm going to finish off real quick, just to give you some examples of the things that you could do to learn more about this. Obviously, I'm not the definitive source of learning environment. There's lots of places you can learn about this. But for instance, other places you may want to explore is even looking at things like massive open online courses. To know massive open online courses, I think it's really important to understand that every MOOC is not made the same. I love this example that from Matthew Plurd, who says every letter is negotiable. So it doesn't have to be massive, not necessarily open, not necessarily online, usually is, and perhaps it's not even a course. So looking at MOOCs, I think it's important to understand that there's many different types. There's in fact Typically, there's XMOOCs, which are the kind of the big university-driven ones, like the two I'll show you, Coursera and edX, and then CMOOCs, which actually stand for connectivist. So more kind of all over this small tools, loosely joined type example. So if you're looking at just taking a course or looking at what's out there in terms of what's available, I would recommend this on this particular theme, that when you look at someone else's course, you get a sense of how they've set things up. You get a sense of their pedagogy. I'm actually a long-time MOOC dropout. Like I've got my terminal degree. I don't need another degree. So basically, I just go into these courses and I check out what's going on. I watch a few lectures. I engage a little bit if they engage me. But then I just kind of drop out and go on to another one. I don't feel any shame in that. So Coursera is a place where you might want to sign up for one. There's fantastic courses there. edX also fantastic ones. Both of these from a lot of different universities. Mostly universities that can pay. I think it costs a lot of money to be part of one of these MOOC cartels. But there's also places like Canvas. Canvas actually offers a really great learning platform. So if you go to the Canvas network, I think it might be canvas.net, there's actually courses you can offer. I don't think you have to pay a lot of money or any money to offer a course through Canvas. So that's kind of a learning management system, but it's one of the better learning management systems, certainly. There's other sites like P2PU, which are quite good. This not only allows you to take a course, but it also allows you to offer courses. It gives you the open tools and community and design and support for those, as it says here. And so I know, like a friend of mine, David Cormier, who's actually building a course through this called Rhizomatic 14 and Rhizomatic 15. Other courses to check out. These are kind of more communities and courses. If you haven't had a chance, Google DS106, fantastic course, more like a community, which is around the idea of digital storytelling. And it's been really an amazing thing by Jim Groom and Cog Dog, or Alan Levine, as he's otherwise known. Really neat one. And for instance, if you just want to check out just part of the course, there's actually, they put together a really cool assignment bank. So if you type in DS106 assignment bank, or I've also added it to the chat there, you can actually see great examples of multimedia assignments that you can engage your students in, and these would be applicable to a lot of different grades. Also, if you want to check out a MOOC in progress, a connectivist MOOC, one that's just about to start, or maybe it just started, is something called Rhizomatic 15, and it's based around this idea of rhizomatic learning, which is very much around this idea of this chaotic networking type learning. So if you want to learn more about this, there's a really great opportunity and a really great guy by the name of Dave Cormier from UPEI who is offering this course as well. But I've got some challenges for you. So challenges this week, if you're part of this eLearn Ontario Game Changer series, I want to give you some challenges to think more about this. So challenge number 1, and these will be posted also in your LMS, right? That's right. First of all, research examples of course environments or sites. And I've actually got a Google Doc, which I'm hoping will also be posted there, with lots of different examples of course environments and course sites and things that teachers have created, things that professors have created. So you may want to wish to go further to explore examples that I haven't even shared. Maybe I'll make the document editable so we can add a bunch of them. But basically, take a look. Research these examples, share what you find via Twitter and or blog post. Number 2, over here, create a sample flipped classroom video using one of the mentioned tools or another one that you might find suitable. So maybe you want to check out those tools that I mentioned, whether it's Explain Everything or now I forget all the other names, but one of those tools, you may want to look at it, see what it means to actually create a lesson. Take something that you love and you know very well and try to translate that into some sort of video. And I think that there's something to be said about trying to do that, because it's not very easy, and I suck at it personally, but it's something that's worth trying. And I think it's, try something different in terms of the way you express learning. Try to build something that is actually an online artifact. And the third one is develop your own mock or active course site. So whether you want to create something that just, maybe you want to create a WordPress-like type site that you maybe it's not even a class you're teaching right now, maybe a class that you're thinking about, and I've actually included tutorials on that doc as well on some of these, or maybe you want to set up something like Edmodo or Schoology, just to try out. Or if you're an active teacher who's getting ready for next year, I guess we're already looking at next year. Maybe you want to think about moving one of these into your own learning environment. So even if you don't want to do that, you may want to just think about what would be the best tools. Maybe you want to create a blog post rather than actually creating one yourself. Start to speculate and to contemplate what would be the ultimate sort of small tools, loosely joined environment where you would include sort of a hub, some communication tools, some classroom type examples. What tools would you use to create this perfect environment? And we'll have some questions, but if you want to get a hold of me, I'm really easy to find, Couros.ca, Couros@gmail.com, or Courosa on Twitter. And I don't know, we'll turn it over for questions. Thanks for letting me talk this long. And I'll just stop. And look kind of all...
Well, there's some questions that came in,
sure,
including, I don't know if you mentioned this product when you were talking about portfolios and assessments.
Well, Tina's already always on the edge of learning new things. I've never heard of them, Sesame HQ, but I'll check it out later on. A great Canadian product for assessment, and that's the thing is I think we do need to find a space for more. That's why I mentioned FreshGrade. There is a huge market for Canadian products, and I think we need to start getting into these. I mean, that's if I should thinking about developing my own, but I think there's a lot of good companies that are coming out there. So thanks for sharing that, Tina. I had no idea about Sesame HQ, but I'll definitely take a look at it. You're always on the edge, Tina.
And what about your thoughts on iTunes U?
iTunes U is, it's good. I think the deal with iTunes U is it does have to be administered by the institution. Like, for instance, I don't think we could actually get it at my university, so there has to be a decision maker who has decision-making possibilities. And I think, from my understanding or like my recollection of this, is that you have to do an application process. The thing with iTunes U is your system has to be ready, because no one wants an empty university of hardly any content. So if there's only one person that's really willing to do it, your application may not be qualified. So I think they need some sort of proof that you're actually going to fill this place with a lot of content. As a consumer, there's lots of fantastic universities where there's great iTunes U sites. So I've only used it really as a consumer for the most part, and there's lots of great universities that offer content. So that would be a great place. And also any one of those podcasts, those bits of content, can be brought into your course management system, whether it be an LMS, sort of a mid-level one, or a sort of that small tools loosely joined type model. There's lots of content on the web that's really fantastic. Again, iTunes U, great idea. It just does take some institutional control or application for that, as far as I remember.
Joe, can I ask the big question that I think you touched on it again, but I think part of our role as ALCs, so sorry, Joe, I interrupted you there, but I'm going to Alec here. Part of our role as ALCs is we are trying to create system-wide support that's really province-wide. And one of the issues that we have is reconciling that with individual teacher preference. So I know you talked about that a little bit earlier, but in terms of a province-wide approach and system-wide approach, what recommendations do you have for teachers? And I'm thinking here, I know often teachers will say, well, I want to do what I want, but I need you to help me.
Yeah.
And I think there's some tension there. Do you have any recommendations for that?
Well, I'll invoke the Rogers innovation curve. So there's that bell curve where you've got basically this idea of laggards on one side and early innovators and innovators on the other side. And I don't think, for the most part, you're never going to get the people that never want to touch technology, and you're not going to get the ones that are on the leading edge of a lot of these different tools. So usually when you're developing and supporting an LMS, you can still capture a large portion of the people that you want in that particular LMS. There's going to be people that refuse to ever use it in practice. And teachers, I think they're autonomous, and they have the right to be autonomous, and they make a lot of classroom decisions. And those who are much more comfortable with those particular tools are just going to go on and do their own. They're going to build their Google Classrooms, and they're going to build whatever it might be, whether it's Edmodo or something that's more chaotic, like I've mentioned before. So make sure that, I think ultimately when you look at standardization across a district or across the province, you want to make sure that you are certainly satisfying the ones that need the most help. And those are the ones that are on the cutting edge for the most part. At the same time, you need to provide provisions, especially in terms of policy and practice when it comes to the Web 2.0 tools. So having, the policy can't be something that's impossible to follow. I've seen early drafts of policy in Ontario that, for instance, speak about protocols as in technical protocols. So, for instance, I know in one of the policies or guidelines, they outlaw SMS as a protocol. It's like outlawing BitTorrent. It's not a full understanding of what that is. You can't outlaw BitTorrent because sometimes it's shared for good, sometimes it's shared for bad. You have to look very closely at teacher practice. So a better way of taking that particular policy that basically said no SMS used by teachers, you could say no private messaging for teachers. And I think that's a big difference. So policy has to make sure it supports practice, not limits it in that sense. So, and that's, there's some really important writing around that. But ultimately, again, when you're bringing in through the buying power of the province, you have to make sure that you choose. Even if you choose something like Canvas, the D2L people won't be happy. And if you choose something like D2L, the Blackboard people won't be happy. You're never going to get everyone on board. You can do your best to support as many as you possibly can, but that's the role. That's your role. I mean, that's the idea that you're never going to please everyone, and there's always going to be gaps that need to be filled out. The best you can do is build a positive support network for teachers, that no matter what they're on, what they're using, that they know where to come to, but they've actually built their own network that they can actually find some support in those spaces. And I think ultimately that's what tech people, tech support type people certainly need to move towards. And I think many of you are there already. Is this idea of moving away from supporting tools and certainly moving towards supporting people.
Yes, perfect. And with that, I just want to be cognizant of time.
Sure.
So I'm looking. I didn't see any questions that really didn't get addressed, I believe, throughout your presentation. I'm looking to my colleagues, and I don't see them indicating otherwise. So with that, I want to thank you very much, Alec. I thought it was very interesting. And I know that the Twitter chat was going on. There was lots of support for the topic and what you were discussing. I also wanted to thank you for being so open about trying new things. The YouTube, as an example, I think is awesome. All too often, I think that we are concerned about not being able to make it work, so we don't even try.
Yeah.
And I think this was great modeling. And it's really what we're trying to do in our e-community and with this virtual speaker series is to help people see that there are other ways that you can try to do things. Yeah. So for that, thank you very much. Before I go on to a couple of other things, though, just for everyone who's still here, I'm hoping I can show a tweet from Donna Fry. And I'm going to try this. So I don't know if everyone can see it. I don't know, Alec, what we need to do. But Donna Fry is talking here. We have an I'm on the wrong one. Awesome MOOC happening tonight following us. So I just wanted to help mention. Oh, here we go. Sorry. So there's cross-panel learning happening, and so anyone at the end of this is more than welcome to join the Awesome MOOC conversation. So thank you very much to Donna for sharing that.
Awesome.
And finally, I want to remind people to join the e-community. Keep the conversation going. You talked about sharing tonight, and this is the environment that we have to start some of our conversation. It's also where the challenges that you've discussed, Alex, can be found. And we have included information on our upcoming speakers, the dates and topics and things of that nature. The video from tonight's session will be posted there as well, and that way people can participate and review the video later and participate in the challenges moving forward. So thank you very much to everyone who is here tonight, and we hope to see you on May 5th for our next Game Changer speaker series. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.